Subscribe to Storylab. Now, let's begin this one. The morning air smelled of fresh coffee and betrayal, though Curtis Robertson only noticed the former as he zipped his overnight bag. His flight to Denver left in 3 hours, another pharmaceutical conference that would keep him away from home for 4 days. At 38, Curtis had built a respectable career as a research coordinator for medical trials, work that required precision, patience, and an ability to read between the lines of data. These same skills would soon save his life. Mr. Robertson? Linda Lambert stood in the doorway of his home office, her fingers twisting the hem of her cardigan. The babysitter had worked for their family for 2 years, a reliable presence in their suburban Connecticut home. She was 53, a former nurse whose steady hands and calm demeanor had made her indispensable after Tommy was born. But now those hands trembled. "What is it, Linda?" Curtis glanced at his watch. His wife Diana was still upstairs, supposedly getting their 4-year-old son ready for the day. Linda stepped inside and closed the door, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Sir, don't go. Please. Pretend you left, but come back in 2 hours." Curtis felt his stomach tighten. "What are you talking about?" "Last night, I came back because I left my phone here. I have a key, for emergencies." Linda's eyes were red-rimmed, as if she hadn't slept. "I heard Mrs. Robertson on the phone in the kitchen. She didn't know I was here. Sir, the thing she said about Tommy." Her voice cracked. "It was horrifying. You must stay here today." The rational part of Curtis's mind wanted to dismiss this as some misunderstanding. Diana could be cold. Yes. Their marriage had grown distant over the past year, the warmth between them replaced by polite coexistence. But his son? Tommy was the light of his life, a bright, curious boy who asked endless questions about how things worked and why the sky changed colors. What did she say exactly? Linda's face went pale. "I can't repeat it all, but she mentioned today specifically. She said, once Curtis is gone, and something about finally being free of a burden." Mr. Robertson, she wasn't talking about divorce. The way she spoke about Tommy, tears spilled down her cheeks. "I've been a nurse for 30 years. I know what dark intentions sound like." Curtis's training kicked in, the same methodical thinking he used to evaluate clinical data. Who was she talking to? "I don't know. A man, I think. She called him baby and said everything was ready." Linda grabbed his arm. "Please, I could be wrong. God, I hope I'm wrong. But if I'm right and something happens to that little boy while you're gone." Curtis made his decision in seconds. "Okay, I'll do exactly as you say. Go home now, call in sick. Don't come in today. If anyone asks, you haven't seen me since yesterday." Linda nodded, relief flooding her features. "Thank you. I'm sorry if I'm causing trouble for nothing." "You're not," Curtis said quietly. "Thank you for telling me." 20 minutes later, Curtis carried his bag to his BMW, started the engine, and backed out of the driveway with a wave to Diana, who stood at the kitchen window with Tommy on her hip. He drove 3 blocks, turned into the parking lot of an elementary school closed for teacher training, and parked behind a building where his car couldn't be seen from the street. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone. The 2 hours stretched ahead of him like an eternity. He couldn't just sit here. Using his phone's browser, Curtis logged into their home security system. He'd installed cameras 6 months ago after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood. One in Tommy's room, one covering the front door, one in the living room. Diana had complained they made her feel watched, so he'd promised to only check them when away on trips. Now he was grateful for every pixel. The living room camera showed Diana pacing, her phone pressed to her ear. Curtis couldn't hear audio. He'd skipped that feature to save money, but her body language spoke volumes. She was agitated, gesturing sharply with her free hand. Tommy sat on the couch, watching cartoons, oblivious. Curtis's mind raced through possibilities. An affair? That seemed likely given the baby reference. But free of the burden. What did that mean? Divorce would free her. Unless. His blood ran cold. Curtis had been the beneficiary of a life insurance policy his company required. But 2 years ago, Diana had suggested they get additional coverage. "We have a child now," she'd said. "What if something happens to one of us?" They'd both taken out policies, substantial ones. Curtis's policy on his own life was for $800,000. But the policy on Tommy. He pulled up his insurance company's app with shaking fingers. The policy on Tommy was for $300,000, taken out 18 months ago. Diana had handled all the paperwork. He'd signed without reading the details, trusting his wife. The beneficiary was listed as Diana Greer Robertson. Curtis felt bile rise in his throat. No, surely not. People didn't kill their own children for insurance money. That was monster territory, the stuff of true crime documentaries that seemed impossible when you heard about them. But Linda's words echoed. I know what dark intentions sound like. Curtis had 90 minutes before he was supposed to return. He used them well. First, he called his brother Fernando, a criminal defense attorney in Boston. They'd never been close. Fernando was older by 6 years and had always treated Curtis like an afterthought. But family was family. Curtis? Aren't you supposed to be on a plane? I need your help. Urgently. Curtis explained everything in clipped, precise sentences. Fernando listened without interruption, his legal mind processing the information. Do you have any proof beyond the babysitter's word? Not yet. That's why I'm going back. Then here's what you do. Record everything. Your phone, hidden cameras, whatever you can manage. Connecticut is a one-party consent state for recording, which means you can legally record conversations you're part of. Don't confront her directly yet. If she's planning what you think, she'll reveal herself. And Curtis, Fernando's voice softened. Get Tommy out of there first chance you get. If you're wrong, you can apologize later. If you're right, I know. Call me the second you have evidence. I'll drive down. Curtis spent the remaining hour researching. He discovered that spousal murders involving children were more common than he'd realized, often involving new romantic partners who saw existing children as obstacles. The pattern was disturbingly familiar. Growing marital distance, secret affairs, financial motives, and a suddenly convenient accident. He thought back over the past year. Diana had become secretive with her phone, angling the screen away when he entered a room. She'd joined a gym and started dressing differently, more provocatively. She'd seemed happier, but not happier with him. Happier in general, as if something in her life had changed for the better. There had been other signs too. Diana had recently suggested Tommy take swimming lessons, despite Curtis's protest that 4 was too young. She'd been insistent. And just last week, she'd brought up the idea of installing a pool, even though their yard was barely large enough, and Curtis had explicitly said no. Water. Easy to make a child's death look accidental. At precisely 2 hours from his departure, Curtis drove back toward his house. He parked 2 streets over, in front of a neighbor's house where he knew the owners were away for the week. He'd brought binoculars from his hiking gear and a portable phone charger. This required patience. The afternoon sun beat down on the BMW as Curtis watched his house through the binoculars. At 2:47 p.m., a silver Lexus pulled into his driveway. A man emerged, tall, athletic build, probably late 30s with styled dark hair and expensive sunglasses. He wore designer jeans and a polo shirt that showed off gym-sculpted arms. Diana opened the door before he could knock. Even from this distance, Curtis could see how she lit up, how she practically threw herself into the man's arms. They kissed, long and deep, right there in the doorway of the home Curtis paid for. Curtis's jaw clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm, to observe. The man entered the house, Diana's hand on his lower back. Possessive. Intimate. Curtis checked the security cameras on his phone. The man, he needed a name. Curtis decided to think of him as Hugo since he looked like a pretentious Hugo, was now sitting on Curtis's couch, drinking from Curtis's coffee mugs. Tommy was nowhere visible on the living room camera. Curtis switched to Tommy's room camera. His son was there, playing with Lego blocks on the floor, building something elaborate. Safe. For now. The living room camera showed Diana and Hugo in conversation. Diana pointed toward the stairs, toward Tommy's room. Hugo nodded, pulled out his phone, and appeared to make a call. Diana leaned against him, her hand on his chest. Curtis's mind clicked through scenarios like a differential diagnosis. If they were planning to harm Tommy today, they'd need opportunity and a plausible story. Curtis was supposed to be in Denver. If something happened to Tommy while he was away, Diana would be the grieving mother. The insurance money would come through. She and Hugo could start their new life. But what was the plan? How were they going to do it? At 3:15 p.m., Curtis noticed movement near his backyard gate. A white van with evergreen pools and spa maintenance, printed on the side, had parked on the street behind his house. Two men got out carrying equipment. Curtis's blood froze. The pool. Diana had been asking about the pool, but they didn't have a pool. They'd never even gotten estimates. Unless. Curtis jumped from his car and ran, no longer caring about stealth. He sprinted through the Hendersons' yard, vaulted their fence, and came up through his own backyard. The two men from the van were setting up what looked like a temporary above-ground pool in the center of his lawn, the kind you could fill with a hose in a few hours. One of them, a heavy-set man with a beard, noticed Curtis. "Hey, buddy, this is private property. You're not supposed to be back here. This is MY property. What the hell are you doing?" The man's confusion seemed genuine. "We got a work order for a pool setup and safety demonstration. Lady of the house called our company this morning, said it was urgent for her kid's birthday party tomorrow." "Show me the work order." The man pulled out a tablet, swiped through some screens. "Diana Robertson, 447 Maple Drive. That's this address." She paid cash up front, extra for same-day service. Curtis's mind raced. A pool setup and safety demonstration. Diana was going to claim Tommy drowned during a pool safety lesson. An accident. A tragic accident that happened while Curtis was away. The temporary pool would be taken down afterward. No permanent evidence. "Listen to me very carefully," Curtis said, his voice deadly calm. "I'm Curtis Robertson. This is my house. My wife did not have my permission to order this, and you need to leave. Now." The bearded man exchanged glances with his co-worker, a younger Hispanic man who looked increasingly nervous. "Sir, we don't want trouble. We just work for the company." Lady seemed normal when she called. "I'm sure she did. But you're leaving, and you're taking that pool with you. We can't just." "Leave it then. Send me a bill. But you're not setting that up, and you're not doing any demonstration with my son. Do you understand?" The younger man was already packing equipment. "Tony, come on. This isn't worth it. Something's weird here." Tony, the bearded man, hesitated, then nodded. Okay. We're going. But our boss is going to be pissed about the cash we're losing. Tell your boss to call me. I'll explain everything." Curtis gave him his cell number, then stood watching until they'd loaded their van and driven away. Only then did Curtis turn toward his house. Through the patio door, he could see Diana in the kitchen, her back to him. Hugo sat at the kitchen table. And Tommy was still upstairs in his room, safe. Curtis pulled out his phone, started a voice recording app, and walked inside through the back door. "Curtis." Diana whirled around, her face going white. "What are you? I thought you had a flight." "Flight was delayed." Curtis lied smoothly, his eyes meeting Hugo's. The other man had stood up, his posture defensive. Up close, Curtis could see Hugo was younger than him. Maybe 33 or 34, with the kind of polished look that came from money. "Airline called, some mechanical issue. Won't leave until tomorrow morning. So I'm home for the day." He smiled, letting it reach his eyes. "Lucky me, right? Get to spend unexpected time with my family." Hugo cleared his throat. "I should probably go. Don't leave on my account." Curtis moved to the refrigerator, pulled out a beer, made a show of being casual. "Diana, you're going to introduce me to your friend?" "This is Hugo Fitzgerald," Diana said, her voice strained. "He's a contractor. I was getting estimates for some work on the house." "Really? What kind of work?" Diana's eyes darted to Hugo. "Just general renovations. Kitchen, maybe the bathrooms." "Interesting. And does this general renovation consultation usually happen with you two alone in the house, with Tommy upstairs, and me conveniently out of town?" Curtis took a long drink of his beer, watching them over the rim. "Or maybe the renovation has something to do with the pool company I just sent away from our backyard?" Diana's face went from white to red. "You were spying on us?" "I live here, Diana. It's not spying when it's my own house." Curtis set down the beer bottle with deliberate care. "So let me ask you directly, what the hell is going on?" Hugo stepped forward, all pretense of being a contractor dropped. "Look, man, this is between you and your wife. You're my house. That makes it my business." Curtis's voice was quiet, controlled, the voice he used when delivering bad news to clinical trial patients. Diana, I'm going to ask you one more time. What are you planning? I don't know what you think you know. I know you called someone last night and talked about being free of the burden once I was gone. I know you took out a $300,000 life insurance policy on our son. I know you've been having an affair with Hugo here. And I know you just paid cash for a pool company to set up in our backyard for a safety demonstration while Tommy is here alone with you. Curtis's hands curled into fists at his sides. So I'll ask one final time. What were you planning to do to my son? The kitchen filled with terrible silence. Diana broke first. Her face crumpled, but not with guilt, with rage. You don't understand. You're never here. You're always working, always traveling, always more concerned with your precious clinical trials than with us. Tommy was supposed to fix our marriage, but he just made everything worse. He's exhausting, Curtis. He never stops asking questions, never stops needing things. I can't breathe in this life anymore. So your solution was to kill him? Curtis's voice cracked despite his efforts to stay controlled. It would have been an accident, Diana whispered. Then, as if realizing what she'd just admitted, her eyes widened. No, I didn't mean an accident, right? During a pool safety demonstration with me conveniently 2,000 miles away. Curtis pulled out his phone, stopped the recording, and sent it immediately to Fernando. Here's what's going to happen now. Hugo, you're going to leave and never come back. Diana, you're going to pack a bag and get out of my house. I'm filing for divorce, and I'm getting a restraining order. And if you try to fight me for custody, you recorded us? Diana's voice rose to a shriek. That's illegal. No, Diana, it's not. Connecticut is a one-party consent state. I can record any conversation I'm part of. Curtis moved toward the stairs. I'm getting Tommy. Why come back down? I want you gone. Hugo finally found his voice. Diana, we should. Shut up. Diana spun on him. This is your fault. You said it would be easy, that no one would question it, that we'd be together. I never said to kill the kid. Jesus, Diana, I thought you were going to, I don't know, send him to boarding school or something. Curtis froze at the top of the stairs. Wait, you knew she was planning something? Hugo ran a hand through his perfect hair. Look, she said she wanted out of the marriage, that she needed money to start over. I suggested she could. He stopped, seeming to realize he was incriminating himself. You suggested she could cash in on her son's life insurance policy. Curtis's voice was deadly quiet. That makes you an accessory. I didn't. We never. Hugo looked at Diana. Tell him we never actually planned to hurt the kid. But Diana's face had transformed into something Curtis didn't recognize. Gone was any pretense of the woman he'd married. In her place stood someone capable of unspeakable evil. You brought him back, she hissed. You ruined everything. Do you have any idea how long I've been planning this? How carefully I've set everything up? Planning what exactly? Curtis needed her to say it. Needed the confession on record. He restarted his phone's recording app, holding it steady. Tommy was supposed to drown today during the pool lesson. A tragic accident. The instructors would testify they tried to save him, but sometimes these things happen. Children are unpredictable around water. Everyone would have been sympathetic. You would have grieved, but eventually you'd move on. I'd have the insurance money, and I could finally live the life I deserve with Hugo. Diana's smile was chilling. But you came back. You always have to ruin everything. Curtis felt ice in his veins. You're talking about murdering our son like it's a business transaction. He's your son, Diana spat. I never wanted him. But you insisted, said a child would complete our family. Well, congratulations, Curtis. You got your perfect little family. I hope you're happy. Curtis didn't wait to hear more. He ran to Tommy's room, scooped up his confused son, and headed for the door. Daddy? Where are we going? On adventure, buddy. We're going to go see Uncle Fernando. Behind him, he heard Diana screaming, heard something shatter. Hugo was shouting too. Curtis didn't care. He strapped Tommy into his car seat, started the engine, and called 911 as he drove. 911, what's your emergency? My name is Curtis Robertson. My wife just confessed to planning to murder our 4-year-old son for insurance money. I have a recording of her confession. I need police sent to my house immediately, and I need to know how to file for emergency custody. As Curtis drove toward the police station, Tommy humming in the back seat, unaware of how close he'd come to death, Curtis realized something. His methodical, careful nature, the same traits that made Diana call him boring, had just saved his son's life. But this was only the beginning. Diana would lawyer up, Hugo would try to distance himself, and Curtis would need to prove in court that he was the fit parent and that his wife was a monster. The game had changed, and Curtis Robertson had every intention of winning. The police station smelled of burnt coffee and desperation. Curtis sat in an interview room, Tommy on his lap, while Detective Patrick Hobbs reviewed the recordings for the third time. Hobbs was in his 50s, with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too much of humanity's worst. Mr. Robertson, this is substantial evidence. Hobbs paused the recording at the point where Diana described the planned drowning. Your wife essentially confessed to conspiracy to commit murder. That's a Class A felony in Connecticut. Can you arrest her? Already done. Units were dispatched to your residence 20 minutes ago. Both Mrs. Robertson and Mr. Fitzgerald were taken into custody. Hobbs leaned forward. Now, I need you to tell me everything from the beginning. Every detail. Curtis did, starting with Linda's warning that morning. Hobbs took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Curtis mentioned the insurance policy, Hobbs made a call that resulted in a financial crimes detective joining them within minutes. Detective Charlene Riley was younger, sharp-eyed, with the kind of focused intensity that made Curtis think she'd be terrifying in an interrogation room. $300,000 on a 4-year-old? That's a red flag right there. Most policies for children max out around $50,000, specifically to prevent this kind of scenario. I didn't know that, Curtis admitted. I signed the paperwork without reading it carefully. Diana handled all our insurance matters. Don't beat yourself up. That's how these predators work. They exploit trust. Riley pulled up something on her laptop. I'm going to need written authorization to access your family's financial records. Whatever you need. Tommy had fallen asleep against Curtis's chest, exhausted from the stress he couldn't fully understand. A victim services counselor had brought coloring books and juice boxes, but Tommy had only wanted to stay close to his father. Mr. Robertson, we're going to need to place Tommy in protective custody until the initial hearing, Hobbs said gently. Standard procedure in cases involving. No. Curtis's voice was firm. He stays with me. Sir, I understand, but Detective Hobbs, my son almost died today. His mother planned to drown him in our backyard. The only reason he's alive is because I came home early. I'm not letting him out of my sight, and I'm certainly not putting him with strangers. Curtis met the detective's eyes. I'll sleep here in the station if I have to, but he stays with me. Hobbs exchanged glances with Riley, who nodded. I can work with that. We'll arrange for a family services evaluation tomorrow, but for tonight, the boy stays with his father. We'll set you up in one of our safe rooms. Curtis felt some tension leave his shoulders. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is going to get uglier before it gets better. Hobbs pulled out another form. Your wife will be arraigned tomorrow morning. Given the severity of the charges and the evidence, we're requesting no bail. But her lawyer will argue she's not a flight risk, that this is all a misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding. You heard the recording. I know, but lawyers are good at creating reasonable doubt. They'll say you misinterpreted, that your wife was having an emotional breakdown, that Hugo Fitzgerald manipulated her. Hobbs tapped his pen against the table. This is where things get complicated. Hugo's already requested a lawyer and isn't talking. Your wife, on the other hand, has been very talkative. What's she saying? That you're the one having an affair, that you've been abusive, that she was terrified of you, and Hugo was helping her plan to leave safely. Hobbs held up a hand before Curtis could protest. I don't believe her. The evidence contradicts every word. But she's establishing a narrative, and it's going to be your word against hers in some respects. Curtis felt a chill. Diana was smart. She'd always been smart. And now she was fighting for her freedom. What about the pool company? They were witnesses to part of this. Already tracked them down. Evergreen Pools and Spa Maintenance. The owner, man named Milton Goodrich, is very interested in cooperating. Says your wife paid $4,000 in cash for an emergency same-day setup and a private swimming lesson for your son. Hobbs flipped through his notes. The two workers you encountered, Tony, that's Arthur Floyd, and his partner Eric Hodge, both gave statements confirming everything you said. They're willing to testify. That's good, right? It's excellent. It corroborates your timeline and shows premeditation on your wife's part. She didn't just talk about this. She took concrete steps to make it happen. Riley looked up from her laptop. And I got more good news. Your insurance company records show that your wife has been in contact with them 6 times in the past month, asking about the payout process in the event of a child's death. Curtis felt sick. 6 times? She was making sure she knew exactly how to claim the money. Riley's expression was grim. Mr. Robertson, your wife didn't snap today. This has been planned for weeks, maybe months. The door opened, and Fernando entered, still in his suit from court. Curtis had never been so relieved to see his brother. Fernando took in the scene, Curtis holding Tommy, the detectives, the recording equipment, and something shifted in his expression. Curtis, thank God you're both safe. Fernando turned to the detectives. I'm Fernando Michael, Mr. Robertson's attorney. I'm assuming my brother is being treated as a witness, not a suspect. Correct, Hobbs confirmed. He's been cooperative and forthcoming. We have no reason to suspect him of any wrongdoing. Good. Then I need to speak with my client privately. Once they were alone in a different room, Fernando sat across from Curtis and studied him carefully. You did everything right. You stayed calm, you documented everything, you got Tommy to safety. But now the hard part begins. What do you mean? Diana's going to argue that you're an unfit parent. She'll say you travel too much, that you were neglectful, that Tommy would be better off in foster care than with you. Fernando's voice was matter-of-fact. She's going to make this a custody battle, even from jail. But she tried to kill him, which is why you're going to win. But it won't be easy or fast. Fernando pulled out his tablet, started typing notes. First, we file for emergency sole custody. Given the circumstances, that should be granted immediately. Then we file for divorce on grounds of abandonment and cruelty. We document everything, the affair, the insurance fraud scheme, the attempted murder. We build a case so airtight that no judge could possibly side with her. How long will this take? Months minimum. Maybe longer if Diana's lawyer is good. Fernando looked at Tommy, still sleeping against Curtis's chest. But you have time, and you have truth on your side. That counts for more than you'd think. I want her to pay Fernando. Not just legally. I want the world to know what kind of monster she is. Careful. Fernando's voice dropped. Revenge thinking can cloud judgment. Your priority is Tommy, protecting him, giving him stability. Everything else is secondary. Curtis knew his brother was right, but the fury burning in his chest wouldn't be extinguished so easily. Diana had planned to murder their son. She'd kissed Curtis goodbye that morning knowing she intended to kill Tommy while Curtis was away. What kind of person could do that? A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Detective Riley entered with a young woman Curtis recognized as in Maldonado, a child psychologist he'd seen speak at a conference once. Mr. Robertson, this is Dr. Maldonado. She's going to do a brief evaluation of Tommy when he wakes up, just to assess his emotional state and make sure he's processing everything appropriately. Riley's tone was gentle. It's standard procedure, and it'll help your custody case. Of course, whatever Tommy needs. Tommy stirred, rubbing his eyes. Daddy? I'm hungry. I bet you are, buddy. How about we get you some dinner? Curtis looked at the detectives. Am I free to leave? For now. But stay local and keep your phone on. We'll need you to come back for formal depositions. Hobbs handed Curtis a card. And Mr. Robertson? Be careful. Diana Robertson is out on bail. Her father posted it an hour ago. Curtis felt his stomach drop. What? You said you were requesting she be held. We did. The judge disagreed. She's on house arrest with an ankle monitor, and there's a restraining order keeping her 500 yards from you and Tommy. But I wanted you to be aware. Hobbs's expression was apologetic. Her father is Harold Ayers. Judge Harold Ayers, retired Connecticut Superior Court. Of course he is, Fernando muttered. Curtis, you never mentioned Diana came from money and connections. I didn't think it mattered. It always matters. Fernando stood. Okay, new plan. You and Tommy are staying with me in Boston until this blows over. My building has security, and I'm not leaving you vulnerable to whatever Diana might try next. Curtis wanted to argue, to say he could handle this himself, but looking at Tommy's confused face, he knew Fernando was right. Okay, let me just get some of our things from the house. Not happening. We'll send someone to pack for you. You're not going near that house until Diana is safely behind bars for good. Fernando was already on his phone, calling people, making arrangements. I'm getting you a protection detail. Off-duty cops, people I trust. Is that really necessary? Your wife tried to murder your child. Yes, it's necessary. Fernando's voice was sharp. Listen to me, Curtis. This woman is desperate now. Desperate people do desperate things. Until she's convicted and sentenced, you and Tommy are at risk. As they left the police station, Curtis carrying Tommy and surrounded by two large off-duty officers Fernando had hired, Curtis realized his entire life had changed in the span of a single day. This morning he'd been a happily married man, or so he'd thought, about to leave for a business trip. Now he was a single father, his wife was facing murder conspiracy charges, and his son had nearly been killed. But Tommy was alive. That was what mattered. Still, as Curtis buckled Tommy into a rental car, Fernando had insisted they not use Curtis's own vehicle in case Diana tried something. Curtis couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Diana had always been meticulous, always thinking 3 steps ahead. She'd planned Tommy's death for weeks or months. What else had she planned? And more importantly, why? The affair with Hugo explained some of it, but not everything. Diana came from money. Her father was a judge, her family well-connected. She didn't need $300,000. So why risk everything for a child's life insurance payout? As Fernando drove them north toward Boston, Curtis stared out the window into the darkening evening and realized he didn't really know his wife at all. And that terrified him more than anything. The safe house Fernando had arranged turned out to be his own penthouse apartment in Boston's Back Bay, a sleek modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows and enough security to make Fort Knox jealous. Curtis stood in the guest bedroom, watching Tommy sleep in the borrowed pajamas Fernando's assistant had purchased, and try to process everything that had happened. It was nearly midnight. In 14 hours, his life had become unrecognizable. You should eat something. Fernando appeared in the doorway with a plate of sandwiches. When's the last time you had food? Curtis couldn't remember. I'm not hungry. Eat anyway. You're no good to Tommy if you collapse. Fernando set the plate on the dresser. I've been making calls. Diana's lawyer is Randall Klein, corporate guy, not criminal defense. Her father must have pulled in a favor because Klein doesn't usually take these cases. Is that good or bad for us? Good. Klein's out of his depth with a murder conspiracy charge. He'll make mistakes. Fernando sat in the armchair by the window. But we need to talk about something else. I pulled Diana's financials, legally, through proper channels, with the court's permission. Curtis, your wife has been embezzling from your joint accounts for the past 8 months. Curtis turned sharply. What? Small amounts, under $500 at a time, so you wouldn't notice. But it adds up. She's moved nearly $43,000 into a private account you don't have access to. Fernando pulled up bank statements on his tablet. The account is in her maiden name, Diana Ayers, at a bank in the Cayman Islands. She was planning to run with Hugo. That's my read. The life insurance on Tommy was just the payday to fund their new life. But there's more. Fernando swiped to another document. Hugo Fitzgerald isn't who he says he is. His real name is Hugo Fitzgerald, no capital G, and he has a record. Fraud, embezzlement, identity theft. He served 3 years in a New Jersey prison and got out 18 months ago. Curtis felt cold spreading through his chest. Diana was involved with a convicted criminal, who likely saw her as an easy mark. Rich woman, unhappy marriage, access to money and insurance policies. Fernando met his brother's eyes. Curtis, I think Hugo manipulated Diana into this. Not that she's innocent. She clearly made her own choices. But Hugo has a pattern. This is his MO. He finds vulnerable women, convinces them to commit fraud or theft, then disappears with the money. So what does that mean for the case? It means Hugo might flip on Diana to reduce his sentence. He'll claim she was the mastermind, and he was just the dumb boyfriend who didn't know what she was planning. Fernando set down his tablet, which is why we need Diana to confess to everything before Hugo gets that chance. How do we do that? We don't. The police do. But we can help by giving them leverage. Fernando began pacing. Diana's biggest weakness right now is her father. Judge Ayers posted her bail, which means he either doesn't believe she's guilty or he's in denial about his daughter's capacity for evil. Either way, he's vulnerable to the truth. You want me to talk to her father? Not you. Me. And not talk. More like present evidence. Fernando's smile was grim. Judges are officers of the court. They can't be seen supporting criminals, even their own daughters. If I can show Judge Ayers exactly what Diana planned, with evidence he can't deny, he might convince her to plead guilty. And if he does it, then we go to trial, and we bury her. But trials are unpredictable, and juries can be swayed by a woman's tears. It's better if Diana pleads guilty and this never sees a courtroom. Fernando checked his watch. I'm meeting with Judge Ayers tomorrow at 2 p.m. You're not coming. You need to stay here with Tommy and start rebuilding your life. What about my job? I was supposed to be at a conference. Already handled. I called your supervisor, explained you had a family emergency. They've given you 2 weeks leave with full pay. Fernando softened slightly. Curtis, you need to let people help you. This isn't something you can manage alone. Curtis wanted to argue, but Fernando was right. He was out his depth. Criminal law, custody battles, financial fraud, these weren't his areas. He was a research coordinator, skilled at reading medical data and managing clinical trials. This was Fernando's world. Okay, what do I do? You take care of Tommy. You document everything. Every conversation with Diana, every court appearance, every interaction. You build a timeline and keep meticulous records. That's what you're good at. Fernando gripped Curtis's shoulder. And you trust me to handle the legal side. Deal. Deal. After Fernando left, Curtis sat by Tommy's bed and watched his son sleep. Tommy's face was peaceful, innocent. He had no idea how close he'd come to death. No concept that his mother had wanted him gone. How did you explain something like that to a 4-year-old? Curtis pulled out his phone and composed an email to Linda Lambert. Linda, I can never thank you enough for what you did today. You saved my son's life. I'm in Boston for the next few days, but when this settles, I'd like to talk about you continuing to work for us. Tommy loves you, and I trust you completely. You're more family than employee. Please let me know if you're comfortable staying on. Curtis. He hit send, then opened a new document on his phone and began typing everything he could remember about the past year. Every suspicious moment, every red flag he'd ignored, every time Diana had been cold or distant or strangely interested in insurance policies. The document grew longer as memories surfaced. Curtis realized there had been dozens of warning signs. He'd just been too trusting, too focused on work, too willing to believe the best of his wife. That would never happen again. At 2 a.m., unable to sleep, Curtis logged into the home security system one more time. The cameras were still active. The police hadn't shut them down. He watched the empty living room, the kitchen where Diana had confessed to planning murder, the backyard where Tommy was supposed to have drowned. Movement caught his eye on the front door camera. Diana. She stood on the porch, her ankle monitor visible above her bare foot. She was staring directly at the camera, her face illuminated by the porch light. For a long moment, she just stood there. Then she smiled. It was the most chilling thing Curtis had ever seen. Not angry or desperate, but calm. Almost amused. As if she knew something Curtis didn't. Diana raised her hand, waggled her fingers in a little wave directly at the camera, then turned and walked back inside. Curtis felt ice in his veins. She knew he was watching. She wanted him to see her there, wanted him to know she wasn't afraid. The message was clear. This isn't over. Curtis forwarded the security footage to Fernando and Detective Hobbs with a one-line message. Diana was at the house tonight, violating the restraining order. The response from Hobbs came 5 minutes later. On it. We'll pick her up first thing in the morning. But Curtis couldn't shake the image of that smile, that casual wave. Diana wasn't acting like someone who'd just been caught planning to murder her child. She was acting like someone who still had cards to play. which meant Curtis needed to figure out what those cards were before Diana could use them. He opened a new search window on his phone and typed, Hugo Fitzgerald, New Jersey fraud case. If Curtis was going to protect his son, he needed to know everything about the man who'd helped Diana plan murder. And he needed to find out before Hugo made his move. The night stretched ahead, sleepless and full of dangerous possibilities. But Curtis Robertson had never backed down from a challenge before. He wasn't about to start now. Morning came too early, filtered through Boston's skyline and into Fernando's guest room. Tommy woke first, confused by the unfamiliar surroundings, but quickly distracted when Curtis suggested they make pancakes together. As they worked side by side in Fernando's designer kitchen, Tommy on a step stool, carefully pouring batter, Curtis tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Daddy, when are we going home? Tommy asked, chocolate chips balanced in his small palm. Not for a little while, buddy. We're staying with Uncle Fernando for now. Is Mommy coming too? Curtis's chest tightened. How much should he tell a 4-year-old? Dr. Maldonado had advised honesty appropriate to his age level. But how do you explain attempted murder to someone who still believed in tooth fairies? No, Tommy. Mommy did something wrong, and she has to stay at her house for now. Did she get a timeout? Something like that. Tommy seemed satisfied with this answer and returned his attention to the pancakes. The innocence of childhood was a blessing Curtis would protect at all costs. Fernando emerged from his home office at 9, already dressed in one of his impeccable suits. Curtis, we have a problem. Curtis ushered Tommy toward the living room with cartoons and juice, then followed Fernando back to the office. What now? Diana's lawyer filed an emergency custody petition this morning. She's claiming you kidnapped Tommy and are keeping him from his mother. The hearing is at 3 p.m. today. Fernando's expression was grim. She violated the restraining order last night, but somehow Klein is spinning it as Diana being emotionally distraught and not in her right mind. He's arguing for supervised visitation. Supervised? After she tried to kill him, Klein is arguing there's no proof of that. He says the recording is ambiguous, that Diana was having an emotional breakdown and said things she didn't mean, that this whole thing is you overreacting to discovering her affair and trying to punish her by taking Tommy away. Curtis felt rage building in his chest. That's insane. You heard the recording. She described the plan in detail. I know, but Klein is good at what he does, even if he's out of his element. He's creating enough reasonable doubt to muddy the waters. Fernando pulled up a document on his computer. However, we have some leverage. Detective Riley finished her financial investigation. Diana didn't just steal $43,000 from your joint accounts. She also maxed out 3 credit cards in your name that you didn't know existed. Total fraudulent debt, $87,000. Curtis felt like he'd been punched. How did I not know? She had the statements sent to a P.O. box. She'd been planning this for over a year, Curtis. This wasn't impulsive. This was calculated. Fernando printed out financial statements. The good news is this gives us ammunition. We can demonstrate a pattern of deception, theft, and premeditated criminal behavior. What about Hugo? Has he talked? Not yet, but his public defender reached out this morning. Hugo's willing to testify against Diana in exchange for a reduced sentence. Fernando met Curtis's eyes. He's claiming Diana manipulated him, that she was the mastermind, that he tried to talk her out of the plan, but she wouldn't listen. That's bullshit. Probably. But it doesn't matter if it's true. It matters if a jury believes it. And a charismatic conman like Hugo, he could sell that story. Fernando closed his laptop, which is why we need to move first. I'm meeting with Judge Ayers at 2 before the custody hearing. I'm going to show him everything. The recordings, the financial fraud, Hugo's criminal history, the pool company statements. If Ayers has any decency, he'll convince Diana to plead guilty and save everyone a trial. And if he doesn't, then we go to war. The hours until the custody hearing passed in a blur of preparation. Fernando's assistant, a sharp woman named Audrey Snell, arrived with clothes for Curtis and Tommy. Apparently, Fernando had anticipated they'd need a wardrobe. Dr. Maldonado stopped by to evaluate Tommy again, spending an hour playing blocks with him while asking careful questions. He's remarkably resilient, she told Curtis afterward. No signs of trauma from yesterday. He seems to understand that something bad almost happened, but that his daddy kept him safe. That sense of security with you is critical. We'll need to tell him eventually what Diana planned. Not for years. When he's older, maybe a teenager, and only if he asks. For now, age-appropriate honesty is enough. Dr. Maldonado handed Curtis her card. I'm recommending full custody to you in my report to the court. Diana Robertson should not have unsupervised access to Tommy, possibly ever. At 2 p.m., Fernando left for his meeting with Judge Ayers. Curtis stayed behind with Tommy and Audrey, trying not to obsess over what was being said. He'd met Diana's father only a handful of times. The man was formal, distant, more interested in his judicial legacy than his family. Curtis had always wondered if Diana's coldness came from her father's emotional unavailability. Fernando returned at 2:45, his expression unreadable. Curtis waited until Tommy was absorbed in a video game before asking, "How did it go?" Judge Ayers didn't believe me at first. Said I was trying to destroy his daughter's reputation to help you in the divorce. Fernando poured himself a scotch despite the early hour. So I played in the recording. All of it. Diana confessing to planning Tommy's murder, the details about the pool, the insurance money. And he left the room for 10 minutes. When he came back, his eyes were red. He said, "If what you're showing me is true, Diana is not the daughter I raised." Fernando took a long drink. I told him everything is documented, verified, and corroborated by multiple witnesses. I told him that Diana has two choices: plead guilty to conspiracy and get a reduced sentence, or go to trial and get buried under the evidence. What did he say? He's going to talk to her tonight. He's not making any promises, but I think we got through to him. Fernando checked his watch. We need to go. Custody hearing starts in 15 minutes. The courtroom was smaller than Curtis expected, more like a conference room than the dramatic spaces he'd seen on TV. Judge Emma Nichols presided, a stern woman in her 60s who looked like she'd heard every sob story and excuse imaginable. Diana sat at the defendant's table with Randall Klein, wearing a conservative dress and minimal makeup, looking every inch the grieving, misunderstood mother. Curtis wanted to vomit. The hearing moved quickly. Klein argued that Curtis had overreacted to discovering his wife's affair and was now using their son as a weapon. Mrs. Robertson made a mistake, Your Honor. She had an affair, and she said some regrettable things in an emotional moment. But to paint her as a would-be murderer based on one conversation taken out of context is a grotesque distortion of reality. Fernando stood, his voice calm and measured. Your Honor, I'd like to play a recording for the court. Objection, Klein said immediately. The recording is of questionable legality. Connecticut is a one-party consent state, Your Honor. Mr. Robertson was present during the conversation and had every legal right to record it. Fernando looked at Klein with barely concealed contempt. Unless opposing counsel is arguing that citizens can't record conversations in their own homes. Judge Nichols considered. I'll allow it. Play the recording. Diana's voice filled the courtroom. Tommy was supposed to drown today during the pool lesson. A tragic accident. Curtis watched Diana as her own words condemned her. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded on the table, her face blank. Only her eyes moved, darting once to Curtis with such pure hatred that he felt it like a physical blow. When the recording ended, Judge Nichols removed her glasses and cleaned them slowly. Mr. Klein, I assume you have an explanation for this. Your Honor, my client was under extreme emotional duress. She'd just been confronted about her affair and said things she didn't mean in a moment of panic. There was never any actual danger to the child. She paid a pool company $4,000 cash to set up that same day. Fernando interrupted. She contacted the insurance company 6 times in the past month asking about payout procedures for a child's death. She stole nearly $90,000 from joint accounts and credit cards. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment. This was premeditated attempted murder. Judge Nichols looked at Diana. Mrs. Robertson, do you have anything to say? Diana stood gracefully. When she spoke, her voice was soft, trembling slightly. Your Honor, I love my son. I would never hurt him. Yes, I had an affair, and yes, I said terrible things when Curtis confronted me. I was panicking, trying to say whatever would make him believe I was sorry. But I never would have actually hurt Tommy. The pool was for a party, the insurance inquiries were, because I was worried about our financial security. Everything has been twisted to make me look like a monster. She was good, Curtis had to admit. If he didn't know better, he might believe her. But Judge Nichols had been doing this too long. Mrs. Robertson, do you expect this court to believe that your comments about your son drowning during a pool lesson on the same day you secretly arranged for pool installation were purely coincidental? I wasn't thinking clearly. Curtis had just. Enough. Judge Nichols put her glasses back on. I'm granting temporary sole custody to Mr. Robertson. Mrs. Robertson, you are prohibited from any contact with a minor child pending resolution of the criminal charges against you. Supervised visitation is denied. This court stands adjourned. The gavel came down with finality. Klein immediately began arguing for reconsideration, but Judge Nichols was already leaving. Diana turned to Curtis, her mask of victimhood slipping for just a moment. The look she gave him was pure venom. You'll pay for this, she mouthed. Curtis met her gaze steadily. No, Diana. You will. The victory should have felt better. Curtis had won custody, Diana was facing serious charges, and Tommy was safe. But as they drove back to Fernando's apartment, Curtis couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. You're quiet, Fernando observed. You just won. Your son is legally yours. It's not over. Diana's not done yet. She's facing conspiracy to commit murder charges, Curtis. Her father is going to convince her to plead guilty. Even if she goes to trial, we have overwhelming evidence. This is over. But Curtis remembered that smile on the security camera, that casual wave. Diana had looked like someone with a plan, not someone caught red-handed. What was he missing? Back at the apartment, Curtis put Tommy down for a nap and then opened his laptop. He'd been researching Hugo Fitzgerald all morning, pulling together pieces of the conman's history. 3 fraud convictions, 2 identity theft charges, 1 embezzlement case. Hugo targeted women, always women with money, always women in vulnerable positions. But the more Curtis read, the more something nagged at him. Hugo's previous victims had been older women, wealthy widows, or divorcees. Diana was only 35, still married, not independently wealthy. She didn't fit the pattern, unless the target wasn't Diana. Curtis pulled up the timeline he'd been building. Diana had met Hugo 14 months ago at her gym. The affair had started shortly after. The life insurance policy on Tommy had been taken out 18 months ago, before Diana met Hugo. Before, Curtis felt ice crawl down his spine. He pulled up their life insurance records again, studying them more carefully. The policy on Tommy had been Diana's idea, yes. But she'd also increased Curtis's policy at the same time, from the standard $800,000 to $2 million. $2 million. Payable to Diana in the event of Curtis's death. Curtis's mind raced. What if the plan wasn't to kill Tommy? What if Tommy was never the target at all? He opened a new search. Accidental deaths that trigger life insurance payouts. Car accidents. Drowning. Falls. Carbon monoxide poisoning. Curtis called Fernando. I need you to check something. The life insurance policies. Is there a double indemnity clause? Let me look. Curtis heard typing. Yes. Both policies have double indemnity for accidental death. Why? Because I don't think Tommy was the target. I was. Silence on the line. Then explain. Diana took out the policies 18 months ago, before she met Hugo. She increased my policy to $2 million with double indemnity. If I died accidentally, Diana would get $4 million. Curtis was pulling up more records, his clinical mind assembling data points. She said Tommy was supposed to drown during a pool lesson today. But what if that wasn't the plan? What if Tommy was the bait? I'm not following. I was supposed to be in Denver. I get a call that Tommy has drowned. What do? I rush home immediately. I'm devastated, not thinking clearly, grieving. Curtis felt the pieces clicking into place. And on the drive home from the airport, I have an accident. Maybe my car goes off the road. Maybe I'm so distraught I crash. Or maybe someone causes the accident. Fernando finished, his voice grim. Hugo. Diana collects $4 million. Everyone is sympathetic. Poor woman lost her son and her husband in the same week. The investigation focuses on Tommy's drowning, not my death, because grief-stricken people do have car accidents. Curtis felt sick. Tommy's death was never about the insurance money on him. It was about setting up my murder. Jesus Christ. Fernando was quiet for a moment. Curtis, if you're right, then Diana is far more dangerous than we thought. This isn't a crime of passion or desperation. This is calculated, sophisticated murder. And she's still out there, on house arrest, knowing her plan failed. Curtis looked toward the bedroom where Tommy slept. Fernando, what if she tries again? What if she has another plan? Then we make sure she can't execute it. Fernando's voice was hard. I'm calling Detective Hobbs. If we can prove this was a real plan, it upgrades the charges from conspiracy to attempted murder. Attempted murder of you, not just the conspiracy involving Tommy. That's a life sentence. We need Hugo to flip. He's the only one who knows the full plan. Hugo's public defender thinks he's clever, waiting for the best deal. Maybe it's time to show him that his silence isn't protecting him, it's condemning him. Fernando paused. Let me make some calls. Don't go anywhere, and keep Tommy close. After hanging up, Curtis returned to his research. If Diana had planned his murder this carefully, what else had she done? He pulled up their joint bank statements going back 2 years, their credit card bills, their tax returns. There, 6 months ago, a charge for $1,500 to a company called Sage Private Investigations. Curtis called the number listed on his credit card statement. A woman answered. Sage Investigations, how can I help you? My name is Curtis Robertson. I'm calling about a charge on my credit card from 6 months ago. Can you tell me what service was provided? I need to verify your identity first, sir. Can you provide the last 4 digits of the card and your date of birth? Curtis did. He heard typing. Yes, Mr. Robertson. You hired us for a standard background check package. Do you need a copy of the report? I didn't hire you. My wife must have used my card. What was the background check for? More typing. It says here the check was for a Curtis Robertson, looking into financials, employment history, insurance policies, and next of kin. The report was delivered via email to... The woman read off Diana's email address. Curtis felt cold. Did the report include information about beneficiaries on life insurance policies? That's standard in our comprehensive package, yes. Thank you. Curtis hung up. Diana had done her homework. She'd investigated him like he was a mark, learning exactly what his life insurance situation was, confirming he'd be worth more dead than alive. This wasn't a desperate woman pushed to extremes. This was a predator selecting prey. Curtis called Detective Hobbs directly. I need to come in. I found something important. Can it wait until tomorrow? We're in the middle of interviewing Hugo Fitzgerald again. It can't wait. Diana wasn't trying to kill Tommy. She was trying to kill me. Tommy's death was supposed to make my murder look like a grief-induced accident. Silence. Then, get here now. Bring everything you found. An hour later, Curtis sat in an interview room at the police station. Fernando had insisted on coming, and Audrey was watching Tommy, while Detective Hobbs and Detective Riley reviewed his evidence. The private investigation report, the timeline, the insurance policies with their double indemnity clauses. This changes everything, Riley said quietly. If you're right, Mrs. Robertson was planning a murder-for-hire scheme, and Hugo Fitzgerald was the hired killer. We need Hugo to confirm it, Hobbs said. If he admits Diana paid him to cause Curtis's accident, we have her cold. He won't talk without a deal, Fernando pointed out. Then we give him a deal. Hobbs stood. But first, we need to arrest Diana again. This time, we're charging her with attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder. No judge will grant bail on charges like that. 30 minutes later, Curtis watched through a one-way mirror as Diana was brought into the station in handcuffs. She no longer looked like the composed woman from the courtroom. Her hair was disheveled, her ankle monitor had been removed, and her eyes were wild. You can't do this, she screamed at the officers. My father is a judge. You'll all lose your jobs. Your father is the one who called us, Hobbs said calmly. After I showed him the evidence of your plan to murder your husband, he decided he'd had enough. He's the one who said to arrest you. Diana's face went white. Then her expression transformed into something Curtis had never seen before. Pure, undiluted rage. Curtis did this. That bastard turned my own father against me. No, Mrs. Robertson. You did this by planning to murder your family. Hobbs placed a folder in front of her. We have the private investigator's report you commissioned. We have the insurance policies. We have Hugo Fitzgerald's testimony. He's confessing everything right now in exchange for a reduced sentence. Hugo wouldn't. Diana stopped, realizing her mistake. Wouldn't what? Betray you? Turn on you to save himself. Hobbs smiled without humor. That's exactly what he's doing. He's telling us how you approached him with the plan, how you promised him $1 million to cause Curtis's accident, how he was supposed to make it look like your husband was too grief-stricken over Tommy's drowning to drive safely. Curtis watched Diana's face cycle through emotions: shock, denial, fury, and finally, calculation. She was trying to figure out if this was a bluff. I want my lawyer. Smart choice. Because you're going to need one. Hobbs stood. Diana Robertson, you're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and identity theft. You will be held without bail pending trial. As I led Diana away, she looked directly at the one-way mirror. Curtis knew she couldn't see him, but it felt like she was staring right through the glass into his soul. This isn't over, Curtis, she screamed. You think you've won? You have no idea what I'm capable of. But Curtis did know. That was the terrifying part. He knew exactly what his wife had become, or maybe what she'd always been. A monster wearing a human face, someone capable of killing her own child just to set up her husband's murder. And he knew something else. Diana was right about one thing. This wasn't over. Not until she was behind bars for the rest of her life. The trial began 3 months later on a gray November morning. Curtis had spent those months rebuilding his life, moving into a new house across town, establishing routines with Tommy, going back to work part-time. Fernando had handled the legal complexities while Curtis focused on being a father. But now, sitting in the courtroom while Diana's defense attorney painted her as a victim of abuse and manipulation, Curtis felt his carefully constructed calm threatening to crack. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Randall Klein said in his opening statement, you're going to hear a lot of damning evidence against my client. Recordings, financial documents, testimony from alleged co-conspirators. But I ask you to remember, Diana Robertson is not on trial here. Curtis Robertson's version of Diana Robertson is. Fernando leaned over and whispered. He's going to argue unreliable narrator. Stay calm. Curtis watched Diana as Klein spoke. She looked gaunt, her orange jumpsuit hanging loosely. She'd lost weight in jail, and her once perfect hair was now pulled into a simple ponytail. She looked nothing like the monster who'd planned to murder her family. She looked like someone's daughter, someone's mother. That was the point, Curtis realized. Klein was humanizing her. The prosecution's case was methodical. Detective Hobbs testified about the investigation. Detective Riley walked through the financial evidence. The pool company owner, Milton Goodrich, described Diana's suspicious cash payment and urgent request for same-day service. Linda Lambert broke down on the stand while describing the phone call she'd overheard. But the most damaging testimony came from Hugo Fitzgerald. Hugo had cleaned up for court, his hair cut short, wearing a suit instead of his typical designer casual wear. He looked like a contrite man who'd made a terrible mistake, not a career criminal who'd planned murder. Tell the jury how you met Diana Robertson. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Julia Murray, prompted. At a gym. She approached me, actually, started flirting. Hugo's voice was steady. I didn't know she was married at first. When I found out, I should have walked away. But she was intense. She said her husband ignored her, that her marriage was dead. When did she first mention killing her family? About 4 months into the affair. She said if Tommy was gone, Curtis would be devastated. And if Curtis was too grief-stricken to drive safely. Hugo trailed off. She made it sound like it wouldn't really be murder. Just helping accidents along. Curtis felt his hands curl into fists. Fernando put a warning hand on his arm. Did she offer you money? $1 million. From Curtis's life insurance payout. Hugo looked down. I'm ashamed to say I agreed. I'd spent years in prison for fraud, and here was someone offering me more money than I'd ever seen. I told myself it was just an opportunity. But you never actually caused Curtis's accident. Why not? Because Curtis came home early. The whole plan fell apart. And when I saw Tommy, Hugo's voice cracked convincingly. He was just a little kid. I realized what we were planning to do. I couldn't go through with it. Curtis wanted to scream. Hugo was painting himself as a man with a conscience, someone who'd been led astray, but ultimately chose right. It was a masterful performance. Klein didn't even cross-examine. Hugo's testimony actually helped their case. If Hugo had manipulated Diana, convinced her to go along with his plan, then Diana was a victim too. When the prosecution rested, Klein called only 2 witnesses, a psychiatrist who'd evaluated Diana and pronounced her suffering from postpartum depression and dissociative episodes, and Diana herself. Diana took the stand wearing a simple blue dress, no makeup, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked like a broken woman. Mrs. Robertson, Klein began gently. Tell the jury about your marriage to Curtis. I loved him when we married. But after Tommy was born, Curtis changed. He was gone all the time, always working, always traveling. I felt so alone. Diana's voice trembled. I was drowning in motherhood. Tommy was a difficult baby, colicky and demanding. I had no help, no support system. And Curtis just wasn't there. Curtis felt the jury's eyes shift him. Klein was building a narrative. The absent father, the overwhelmed mother. When did you meet Hugo Fitzgerald? About a year ago. He paid attention to me. He made me feel seen. Diana wiped her eyes. I know it was wrong to have an affair. I'm not proud of that. But I was desperate for human connection. And the plan to harm your family. Whose idea was that? Hugo's. Diana looked directly at the jury. He said if something happened to Tommy and Curtis, I'd have money to start over. I thought he was joking at first, but he kept bringing it up, pressuring me, telling me how easy it would be. Her voice dropped. I was in a dissociative state during those conversations. My psychiatrist says I was essentially having a mental breakdown. The things I said on that recording, that wasn't me. That was a woman who'd lost herself. Klein let the moment breathe. Mrs. Robertson, did you actually plan to kill your son? Never. God, never. Diana's tears looked genuine. I loved Tommy more than anything. When Curtis came home and accused me, I panicked. I said terrible things trying to make him understand how desperate I felt. But I never would have hurt my baby. And Curtis's life insurance? Hugo's obsession, not mine. I didn't even know about the double indemnity clause until the police told me. By the time Klein finished, half the jury looked sympathetic. Curtis felt sick. Fernando called Curtis to the stand for rebuttal. Curtis walked through his version of events carefully, methodically, the way he'd present clinical data. Mr. Robertson, Fernando asked, in the year before these events, how much time did you spend traveling? I was gone roughly 4 days per month. About 48 days total that year. And when you were home, I was fully present. I'd take Tommy to the park, read him bedtime stories, give Diana breaks so she could go out with friends or have time to herself. Curtis looked at the jury. Was I perfect? No, but I was trying. And I never, not once, gave Diana reason to believe I wouldn't support her if she needed help. Did your wife ever tell you she was struggling? Not directly. If she had, I would have adjusted my schedule, hired more help, done whatever was needed. Curtis's voice was firm, but she never asked. She just started an affair and planned to murder me. Klein's cross-examination was brutal. He pointed out that Curtis couldn't prove how present he'd been, that perception and reality often differed, that maybe Curtis hadn't noticed his wife's suffering because he was too absorbed in his work. But Curtis had one advantage. He had the recordings. Fernando played them again for the jury, Diana's voice, clear and cold, describing Tommy's planned drowning, describing the insurance money. There was no dissociation in that voice, no mental breakdown. There was only calculation. Mrs. Robertson, Fernando said in his closing argument, wants you to believe she's a victim. That Hugo Fitzgerald manipulated her. That postpartum depression made her say things she didn't mean. That her husband's absence drove her to madness. But ladies and gentlemen, the evidence tells a different story. Diana Robertson hired a private investigator to research her husband's finances. She increased his life insurance policy without his knowledge. She stole $90,000 from joint accounts. She paid a pool company in cash to set up what was supposed to be a murder scene. These are not the actions of a woman having a mental breakdown. These are the actions of a woman committing premeditated murder. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the four women stood and read the verdict. Count 1, attempted murder of Curtis Robertson, guilty. Count 2, conspiracy to commit murder, guilty. Count 3, insurance fraud, guilty. Count 4, identity theft, guilty. Diana showed no emotion as the verdicts were read. She simply stared at Curtis across the courtroom, her expression blank. At sentencing 2 weeks later, Judge Nichols looked at Diana with something like pity. Mrs. Robertson, you had every advantage in life. Loving parents, education, a child who deserved better than what you planned for him. Instead of cherishing what you had, you chose murder. Instead of asking for help, you chose betrayal. This court sentences you to 35 years in state prison without possibility of parole. Diana finally broke. She screamed, lunging toward Curtis before the bailiffs restrained her. This is your fault. You did this. You took everything from me. No, Curtis said quietly, though she couldn't hear him over her own screaming. You did this to yourself. As they led Diana away, still shouting accusations and threats, Curtis felt something inside him settle. It wasn't quite peace. He'd never forget what his wife had planned. But it was justice. Tommy would grow up knowing his father had protected him, had chosen him over everything else. And Diana would spend the next 3 decades behind bars, thinking about the monster she'd become. Curtis walked out of the courthouse into winter sunlight, Fernando beside him. It's over, Fernando said. Yeah, Curtis agreed. It's finally over. But he was wrong. 6 months later, Curtis was reading to Tommy at bedtime when his phone rang. Fernando's name flashed on the screen. Curtis, we have a problem. Curtis stepped into the hallway, keeping his voice low. What kind of problem? Diana's appealing her conviction. Her new lawyer, not Klein, someone else, has found a technicality. Something about the original search warrant for her phone records. Fernando sounded tired. They're arguing that without the phone records, most of the other evidence is fruit of the poisonous tree. Can they really overturn the conviction? It's unlikely, but they can drag this out, force a retrial, make us go through everything again. Fernando paused. There's something else. Diana's been writing letters from prison. To Tommy. Curtis felt ice in his chest. What? The prison has blocked them so far. Part of the restraining order. But her lawyer is arguing that denying a mother contact with her child is cruel and unusual punishment. They're petitioning the court for supervised letter privileges. Absolutely not. She tried to kill him. I know, and I'll fight it. But Curtis, you need to prepare for the possibility that this isn't as over as we thought. Fernando's voice was gentle. Diana has time now. All the time in the world to plan appeals, to find new lawyers, to figure out ways to disrupt your life. After hanging up, Curtis stood in the hallway for a long time. He thought about Diana in her prison cell, still manipulating, still plotting. He thought about Hugo, who'd gotten only 10 years thanks to his cooperation and would be out in 7 with good behavior. He thought about the decades ahead, always looking over his shoulder, always waiting for the next legal challenge. Then he went back into Tommy's room and finished reading the story. Because that was what mattered. Not Diana's machinations, or the imperfect justice system, or the fear that she'd never truly be gone from their lives. What mattered was Tommy's sleepy smile, his small arms wrapping around Curtis's neck, his whispered, "Love you, Daddy." What mattered was that Curtis had won where it counted. Tommy was safe, happy, and loved. The boy had nightmares sometimes, would wake up crying for reasons he couldn't explain. But Curtis was always there, ready to comfort and protect. Diana had taken his marriage, his trust, his illusion that the world was fundamentally safe. But she hadn't taken his son, and she never would. 3 months later, Diana's appeal was denied. The conviction stood. 2 years later, Hugo was released from prison and immediately violated his parole. He was caught running another con and sent back for his full sentence. 5 years later, Tommy started 3rd grade. He had friends, played soccer, and loved science. He knew his mother was away and that she'd done bad things, but the details would wait until he was older. 10 years later, Curtis had remarried, a kind woman named Linda Lambert, the same Linda who'd warned him all those years ago. She'd stayed with the family, first as a babysitter, then as something more. They'd fallen in love slowly, carefully, both of them damaged by Diana's betrayal in different ways. Tommy, now 14, stood as the best man at their small wedding. He'd grown into a thoughtful, brilliant young man interested in criminal psychology, perhaps not surprising given his history. He wanted to understand how people became monsters, how someone like his mother could plan to kill her own family. Curtis knew the answer. Some people were always monsters. They just hid it better than others. Diana remained in prison, her appeals exhausted. Curtis had visited her once, when Tommy was 12 and asking questions about why his mother had done what she'd done. Curtis had needed to see her to understand if there'd ever been a real person beneath the monster. She'd looked old, worn down by prison life. But when she'd seen Curtis through the plexiglass, her eyes had lit with the same calculation he remembered. "You won," she'd said simply. "I underestimated you. You underestimated how much I loved my son." Love. Diana had laughed bitterly. "Love is just another kind of weakness, Curtis. It makes you predictable, controllable. No, Diana. Love is what saved us. You never understood that." As Curtis had walked away, he'd heard her shout one final thing. "He'll find out eventually. Tommy will learn what you did to me." But Curtis wasn't afraid, because he'd done nothing except protect his child. The truth was on his side, documented in court records and evidence lockers. The truth was that a father had loved his son enough to fight for him. And in the end, love had won. Curtis sat on his porch 15 years after that terrible day when Linda had warned him, watching Tommy, now 19 and home from college, throwing a football with his younger half-sister Emma. Life had gone on. The scars remained, but they'd healed. Diana had 20 years left on her sentence. By the time she got out, Tommy would be in his 30s, Curtis in his 50s. Maybe she'd be reformed. Maybe she'd still be the monster. It didn't matter anymore, because Curtis had built something Diana could never take away, a family based not on lies and manipulation, but on trust, honesty, and genuine love. As the sun set and Linda called everyone in for dinner, Curtis thought about the man he'd been that morning 15 years ago, trusting, naive, oblivious to the danger in his own home. He'd evolved into someone stronger, wiser, more careful, someone who trusted his instincts and protected what mattered most. Diana had tried to destroy him. Instead, she'd made him better. And that, Curtis thought as he went inside to his family, was the sweetest revenge of all. Living well, living honestly, living with love. Diana had lost everything in pursuit of money and freedom. Curtis had nearly lost everything, but had fought back and won. The story could have ended in tragedy. Instead, it ended with a father and son safe, a monster behind bars, and justice served. Not a perfect ending. Tommy would always carry the knowledge of what his mother had planned. But a good ending. A true ending. And sometimes that was enough. Curtis closed the door on the past and sat down to dinner with his family, grateful for every moment, every day, every second chance life had given him. He'd faced the worst a human could do and had survived. More than survived, he'd triumphed. And that made all the difference.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.